Yo, Grand Rising. How you doing? This is your coach Renz, and welcome to Deconstructing Christianity. Running late, starting out real late today, about 18 minutes late. Uh, got caught up in a project and didn't realize what time it was. But we're here now. So we're getting ready to have this conversation at about the 5 minute mark, where we're going to talk about the fact that Black people are not Israelites, as well as we were not already here, as well as America is not Egypt. So those are the three primary subject matters I want to talk about tonight. We'll see how well we can stick to those subject matters. I hope everybody's been having a great day. Right? Had a good day today myself. Nice warm temperatures. Chickens. Grand Rising Teresa. Dwayne, what's up? I understand, man. Running late. I was running late today too. I just wasn't paying attention to the time. I got caught up into this little home project. So, yeah. Well, I can go ahead and tell you what the project is. I'm good. I like talking about different things. So there's a new channel that I'm going to start, and it's basically a Marvel comic books and MCU channel. And so I was pulling out some of my comics to make me a comic wall. So I'm gonna have a comic book wall that I shoot for that stuff. Um, and I was going through like about 3,000 comics to figure out which books I want to put up on the wall. So that's my reason for being late. I got caught up in my comic book collection. So don't be mad at me. Don't be mad. Yep. Um, is that pronounced Hosu? It's Jose, right? I never seen it spelled that way. But yeah, yeah. It's kind of sad that you got to do a whole video live stream about this subject matter. And the thing about it is because people they want to believe whatever they want to believe that fits a narrative that makes them feel good. So get my cigar ready. I don't even know what I'm smoking because no, Angelina just brought it. Oh, Gurkha Heritage. All right, Gurkha Heritage. Good evening, Debbie. How you doing? Michael, how you? Great, free mind. Devante, how y'all doing? And just to rub it in, because y'all know I'm petty about the weather. We had a nice 75 degrees here, felt like 77 here in San Antonio. I just want to rub that in for those of you who are still experiencing 60 and below. Grand Rising Junie. Yeah, I actually think that this is a very important conversation. And one of the things that made me think about it is the fact that, um, when was it? Last weekend? I think it was last weekend. My wife and I was walking around downtown Sun. Yeah, not last weekend. The weekend before, we was in downtown San Antonio, down by the Alamo and Riverwalk, and um, the Power Rangers was out there. Yeah, we know what you smoking, Rick and Sheila. So the Power Rangers was out there, all in I think about four different spots around San Antonio, downtown San Antonio. Ooh, David, y'all had a 80 degrees up there. You farther north than me. You ain't supposed to have that. What up, James, John, Diva? We're gonna get into the whole thing about no slave ships and all of that. We're gonna hopefully we can have a good conversation about this. Tim reporting to duty. Tim, you late. 61 in Nashville. Oh, all right, Rick and Sheila. I have a cousin who just moved to Henderson. So some shit go down, I'll be reaching out. Gotta make sure my niece is taken care of. Yadim Mithai. That's Matthew. I can never say, I don't say the Hebrew names correctly half the time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to Deconstructing Christianity, where tonight we're going to have a discussion concerning. I don't have room to put 2 subject matters in the title, but it's actually 3. And we can talk about any 3 of them at any time frame. The topics, are, like I said earlier, is based on the fact that I ran into some of them Power Rangers downtown San Antonio, and it reminded me of the fact that they believe and have this idea that Black people as well as Spanish people and Native Americans are parts of the lost tribe of Israel. And so we're going to discuss how we are not part of the lost tribe of Israel. We are not Israelites. Also, we're going to talk about the fact that you have the other side of the group that claims that we were already here, that the transatlantic slave trade in no way possible occurred at the level by which they talk about it. We had a brief conversation about this at the end of one of the lives last week. And also the fact that America is not Egypt. So you have 3 different camps that are out there who like to just bring those things up. And if they all got together, they will find that they are in conflict with each other as far as having that, as far as that perception. I've never read the book Louisiana Redbone. No, I haven't. So let's just kick it off. And I think you have to, in order to kick off the fact that we are not Israelites, you have to start out by defining and understanding where Israelites come from. And the overwhelming consensus is the fact that Israelites are they were Canaanite people prior to becoming known as Israelites. The first mentioning that we have of Israelites goes back to around 1204 with the Mesha Stele, which is Pharaoh Mesha saying that he came and destroyed a people group that was called themselves Israelites. Now, in the Mesha Stele is very interesting because when he named the other people that he conquered, he denoted that those people were nations, or they were people that was in a city wall. They were established people. But when he spoke about the Israelites, he just denoted them as a people group. So they were a nomadic group of Canaanites that had started identifying themselves as Israelites, probably a good, maybe possibly 100 years prior to that, more than likely less of a time frame than that. So we don't have anything that is an Israelite until the earliest, or at the latest, around the 1300 BCE. And so then they are destroyed. Now, some people think that they turned into these Israelites because they started whittling away from the Canaanite worship of El, as well as when you look at some of the other, like the Mesha Stele and some of the other ones that denotes them as probably a part of the Shashu people came up and became a part of them. But you don't have an Israelite until around 1200s BCE, possibly late 1300 BCE, right? So that's when you first get an Israelite, right? Mike Drop says, funny that you're African American, but who's European American? Never heard of that. I'm not quite sure I understand what you're saying. But anyway, I thought I understood it when I first clicked it, but I didn't. I don't. I don't understand what you're saying. So we don't have anything of an Israelite. Now, as Israelite history would go, during the Bronze Age collapses when they were able to truly establish themselves as a people group. And Oh, I see what you're saying. Lorenzo Reed and African American, Donald Trump and American. Is that right? No, it's not right. It's not right at all. I am an American. I have African ancestry. Donald Trump isn't an American, but he has European ancestry. It is because of segregation, it is because of slavery that Black people started identifying with their African heritage in the early 1900s, all the way up through the 1960s and 70s, and really gained momentum in the 1960s as a way of instilling more history, more pride than just slavery. So we began to identify. So it's a choice that Black people in America, that Black Americans made. White Americans, since if you are the ones that's in control, you keep it. You just want to be Americans. No, I've heard plenty though, European Americans say, I'm Scottish American, I'm Irish American. So it's not completely unheard of. But I think you're just being funny, just trying to kind of be a troll on this one because of this statement. But if you are, you are. If you and most people, because most people understand where and why Black people started referring to themselves as African American. But if you choose to ignore and just be an ass about it, you go right ahead. So anyway, the point is the aspect of it is that they then started establishing themselves after the Bronze Age collapsed, and then after the Bronze Age collapsed, they got conquered by the Assyrians. Now, this is very important. When they got conquered by the Assyrians, the northern tribes of Israel, which is where 10 of the tribes were, and 2 of the tribes was in Judah. The northern tribes, after they were conquered, they were assimilated into the Assyrian Empire. They were conquered, they were brought into cities like Nineveh, and they became a part of their fabric. In the same way that my ancestors were brought over to America after African countries are either conquered and colonized, or those that participated in the slave trade with the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Anglos. Then they were transported to America, and we have become, over the generations, part of the American fabric. So we are, that is the same way that the Israelites became, the 10 tribes became part of the Assyrians. Now, some did return, but then they were conquered by Babylon and then assimilated into the Babylonians as well. And then the Persians released them. But by the time the Persians released them, there was really only 2 tribes that was recognized of Israelites. So with that being said, there are no lost tribes. There are no lost tribes of Israel. The lost tribes were either absorbed into the 2 tribes that were remaining, or they were absorbed into Babylon and Assyria. There are no lost tribes, none whatsoever. It's kind of like if you go down into the Dominican, or would you say that there's a lost tribe in the Dominican Republic of Tianos? No, they were absorbed into the cultures that came up, that became dominant, and now they are just Dominican. This is one of the reasons why the people in those, well, most people in the islands have a strong nationalism about them. And if you ask them about race, they will actually claim their nationality instead of their race, right? So there are no lost tribes of Israel. So that in itself takes away from the idea that any of us who are in the Americas are Israelites. Now, the other aspect that none of us are Israelites is because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the world was not repopulated by Noah's 3 sons and their wives. We know that genealogy wouldn't even work. We'd be a bunch of people with all kinds of issues if that level of recreation of the population happened. There's not enough genetic diversity in 3 couples who are all related, by the way, to be able to have enough genetic material to create everyone. So with that, it's an impossibility that the people in Africa, in West Africa, were Israelites, because the Israelite idea is that during the during those time frames where they got two thoughts that you'll hear from them. One, during the diaspora, for either from the Romans or from the Babylonians or Syrians, they migrated into sub-Saharan Africa. Or they will grab a hold to Deuteronomy, where Deuteronomy said that your children will be sold, sell away on ships and be sold for 400, be in slavery for 400 years. There's some problems with that. One, the people who were brought over into slavery were not Jewish, they were not Israelites. That's the first part. Second part, the people who there was no mass migration of Israelites into West Africa. That's another point. Another point is that Deuteronomy says that once they get to Mizraim, get to Egypt, there will be many buyers. But we know the transatlantic slave trade had plenty of buyers. It also says they went to Mizraim, but we know that Mizraim is not America. It is Egypt. And it has it, the way it's written, it is written to mean the land Egypt, not a people of Egypt. So the ideas that we come from there doesn't hold up to any water. None of their points work. From my memory, I cannot state this factually, but from my memory, they was brought down into just two tribes. But I could be wrong. It could be four, but I'm sure that it's two, but I could be wrong. So when you think about their points that they try to push, none of their points actually fit into what we know as actual history. My ancestors came over here from West Africa practicing Ifa, or what we know as Ifa today. Some of them believed in Chechua, some of them believed in Oshun, but they were not Israelites. So none of my ancestry is Israelite. None of it is Hebrew. So no. And the overwhelming majority of Americans who families came over during the transatlantic slave trade, if you're able to trace your family back to the ship, you will find that ship manifest comes from one of the West African countries for the most part, most likely, and that they were not Israelites. And then the Bible just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the narrative of history. Now, they say that, now they don't claim that America was Egypt. They claim that America, that when it says Mizraim, it is like a metaphor for America. I haven't met any or heard any that say that America is Egypt. I'm sure there probably are some, but I haven't met any or heard any who say that. It's like a whole nother group that will claim that America is Egypt. So the people from the transatlantic slave trade are not Israelites. And if the majority of our ancestry is from that era, from that time frame, then we are not Israelites. And they try to claim that the Spanish people in the Americas are Israelites because in their making up shit, what they claim is that the children of Ham, that some of their children came to the Americas long before any European. The Japheth's kids are the ones that became the Europeans. Shem's kid became the Semites, the Israelites, and then Ham's kids became the Africans, and I believe the Africans, and then there's some kind of mixture they do for the Asians and then the people in the Americas. So they try to do that to drum up numbers with the Spanish community that's in the Americas. But what we also understand is that people have been in the Americas for at minimum 25,000 years. Minimum. There are other indications that people have been in the Americas for 125,000 years. So this whole idea of them coming from Noah's children is ridiculous because history tells us a completely different story. Um, and we don't know who the Olmecs were, but the Olmecs were more than likely one of a people group that was in the Americas long before like they history was already here, and then like many civilizations, they die out, they go away. No, I haven't heard anything from Wes Huff. Only thing I heard about him is that he's claiming that his schedule is booked up for 2025. So I wouldn't hold my breath on that. Yeah, it's long. Uh, where are you from, Lupa? People in the U.S. aware of their history came from. They are Europeans, not Native Americans. So, as Africans in the U.S., they are Africans, not Native Americans. Israel was only born 6,000 years ago. Actually, there was no Israel 6,000 years ago. Their religion claims to be 6,000 years old, but um, Israelites are only about 3,500 years ago. But yes, the world is 4.5 billion years. The Bible and the Testament, humanity began to exist about 2,000 plus. Right. So we've been in existence longer than their book have even mentioned. And the fact that there is no such thing as an Israelites until about 2,500 years, 3,500 years ago. So if I said 2,500 years ago, my mistake. About 3,500 years ago. It's the first time you actually can legitimately say that there were a people group who called themselves Israelites. And understand, people just call themselves different things. You may have a person who was a part of one tribe, but then 200 years later they call themselves something different. Just like Israelites used to be Canaanites. You know, there were no Chinese people 35, 4,500 years ago. They were called different names. There were Tatarians, and there were other people groups that they call themselves differently. And then over time, their name changed to become what we call them in our modern day world. So it just doesn't work that way. So these names just consistently and continuously change. I know people, I know old black people who still call themselves colored because that's what they grew up calling themselves. And that's what the society called them. And they didn't change when it went from colored to black to Afro American to African American. So names change. What people are African American to your understanding? If you have a family history that has been here since, if you're black and you have a family history that has been here since and during the time frame of slavery, and your ancestry comes from Africa, African American. If you were born in Africa, but then you come to America and you gain American citizenship, you are truly still African American legally. But when we talk about social structure, perfect example, Elon Musk technically, legally, is an African American. Leon Elon Musk socially is not an African American. And I know I'm drawing a distinction because if you give me a Nigerian who leaves Nigeria and comes to America, technically you can call them an African American, but most of the time they identify as Nigerian American. They will not identify as African American. Most of the time they will identify to their home country. So since you asked the question, I was in the Marine Corps with many people who call themselves Italian American. I was in the Marine Corps where many people call themselves Irish Americans, Scottish Americans. So yeah, German Americans. My daughter actually can call herself a German African American. But to answer your question, do most white people identify with that? No, they don't. And yes, she would identify herself as an American of African descent. So anyway, now if you can't draw the distinction between somebody legally being something and somebody socially being something, I'm just gonna say it plainly, you're just stupid. That's all it is. You're just dumb. You're just dumb and you just want to have your way with something, thinking that you're making some kind of point. But that's about it. So anyway, there is not one shred of evidence that would indicate that the people who came across on the transatlantic slavery are Israelites. There's not one shred of evidence that would show that the people who are already in the Americas were Israelite. There is not one shred of evidence that would show that Europeans were Israelites or anyone in Africa was Israelites, because there's no evidence whatsoever that would demonstrate that um, the Israelites actually came from Noah's children. So, because I want to get into your questions and stuff, let me go ahead and knock out the other two. The idea that we were already here. Now, I know somebody said Dan Calloway earlier. Dan Calloway is probably he's the biggest voice that I've heard that talks about we were already here. Now, were there already some black people in the Americas? Yeah, very few. If you read Columbus journals, you read Columbus's cousin's journal, Cortez's journal, they all remark about how there were large black men already in Mexico, already on the islands in the Caribbean, but that they were there as trading partners to those people for some, and others were there living there. Now, were the ones who were living there, did they come on the Mali expedition? Possibly. We don't have any indication that those Mali expedition that first large Mali expedition came back. All from what we understand, they either were lost at sea or they made it there and stayed there. But what we do know is that gold-tipped spears from the people in the Americas, whether they were the ones in Mexico and the ones in the Caribbean, match the same gold that is only mined in Ghana. So the fact of the matter is, there was already trade going on. And this is one of the reasons why the 4 pilots of Columbus's ship were men from the Ivory Coast, because the West Africans knew of the Atlantic current that would bring you to the Americas. So there was already some here. But what they persistently say is that when the Europeans came to the Americas, the Europeans enslaved the indigenous people, and those are the people that I am today. Admittedly, are there some indigenous people in my family line? Yes, a couple. One of them was was the child of the Creek Indians who bought one of my grandfathers as a slave and bought him to be her husband. And so they had a child. And that child is part of my family line. So I got that little bit. But he was purchased as a slave to be a husband because they had lost so many people through warfare and lost so many people through diseases that's why. But they came from Africa. The overwhelming majority of my ancestry comes from Africa on slave ships. We have expeditions that have found to this date, I know they found 12 shipwrecked slave ships, but they estimate that there are thousands of shipwrecks that are out there, right? But we also can find the documentation of these over 35,000, some estimate 36,000 voyages. No, there's 36,000 documented voyages between Africa and the Americas. And the overwhelming majority went to the Caribbean and to South America. The overwhelming majority didn't come to the Americas, but they still came on ships. For a almost 200-year time frame, you had thousands at any given time frame. You had 1,200 slave ships that were in operation, carrying anywhere from 250 to 600 slaves per trip, making about 3 to 4 trips a year. Some making even more, because what people don't realize is that the voyage from West Africa to America at their time frame with their technology only took about 4 to 6 weeks. At most, during low current season, it would take 8 weeks. So the idea of it taking 4 months is ridiculous, completely ridiculous. Hell, and if you do the math of that and account for the about 15% that would have died on the Middle Passage, you still come up to over the 12.6, 12.7 million that is estimated. You still come up to around 13, 14 million that were transported. The problem with most Americans is that they only see the ships coming to North America, not realizing that the overwhelming majority went to the Caribbean and went to South America. There are more people of African descent in Brazil than there is in the entirety of the United States. So more went there than anywhere else. The fact that we know that the last ship was in 1870, 1880, the Clotilda, because even after it was outlawed, ships were still sneaking their way in. Now, if a ship got caught, they would either throw the people off the boat with chains on them, or they would burn the people inside the boat. But a lot would have gotten through. Their Navy, the American Navy, was not like our Navy today. So once in 1806, the transatlantic slave trade ended in the America legally, it did not end, period. Just like you can say that it's illegal to have marijuana in America, shit still get in. So slaves were still being brought in even after 1806. But if we just look at that 200-year period, you still have over 12 million people being transported into the Americas, most of them going to the Caribbean and South America. So, and yes, 15% is generous. Some estimates are actually down to like 12 and 10%. So, and right, Chinka is just like prohibition. People, when you outlaw something, criminals find it as an opportunity, and they're going to take that opportunity. Now, the fact of them saying that we were already here also doesn't make any sense whatsoever, simply because you have the so-called five civilized tribes that were all East Coast tribes. These East Coast tribes vacated their heritage for the most part, put on European clothing, enacted European laws, and took on European customs. And one of those European customs was to buy slaves. And as a matter of fact, even though here in Texas, in Galveston, on June 19th, when the so-called last slaves were freed after the Civil War, no. It was almost 1 year later, I think like June 4th or June 12th, somewhere around there, that the last Africans who were freed in the Americas, because it wasn't federal territory, was in the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw Nation was the last ones to actually free African slaves. And the fact that they had to go and force them to free their African slaves is one demonstration of these so-called five civilized tribes buying African slaves. When you looked at their roles, even after that, you looked at the Indian roles, the Native American roles, you saw that they try to not count many of those who were born into those tribes as indigenous people, but count them as Africans. And it wasn't just the European, the American, I forgot his name, guy who was over it, who was doing it, but the nations themselves, the Native American nations themselves were doing this to not, to make sure they didn't get the same privileges and benefits that they were receiving from the American government. And that happens all the way up to today. If you don't have enough, they make sure they try their best to keep you out. So because we know the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and there's one other that just fell out my head, but they all bought African slaves, just like the Europeans. If we were already here, how are you doing it? It's not going to work. We know that many joined the Seminole Indians, because if you go and research the Seminole Indian Wars, one of the things you'll find is that many runaway slaves from Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi ran to Florida and joined with the Seminoles and fought with the Seminoles. But these were African slaves who went and joined the Seminole Indians and helped them fight their Seminole Indian Wars in Florida. And I think that war lasted for like 7 years. But if we were already here, you wouldn't be able to identify the ones who went down and helped them fight. So it wouldn't work. I know I'm missing a lot of y'all questions. I'm sorry. But I want to get through this stuff, get through some of this information so that you have all of it. And here's do your family tree and you do a forensic work and you'll see who you are. Exactly. 90% of my ancestry comes from America, comes from Africa. 90% come from Africa. Are there some Europeans in there? There's a couple of Europeans in my family tree. Are there some indigenous people in there? There's a couple of indigenous people. But 90% of the people that I found, they all came from Africa. They were all from Africa. I knew there had to be at least one in the group. There's only, man, please. And I don't understand where y'all get this thought process. A lot of us have had ancestors to say, my grandma, that was Indian. So who you gonna believe, a company, or you gonna believe your ancestry? I'm going to believe the documentation of my ancestors. My grandmother, did she tell me that one of her ancestors was native? Sure. Straight Creek. One of them, but not her daddy, not her granddaddy and her grandmama. One of the person, her grandfather on her mama's side was, but the rest of my grandmother's family line, African. Ain't nothing to do with indigenous people. And you have to realize there was this time frame in the 70s, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. All these black people was trying to claim I got Indian in my family. And that was the thing that it was, I got Indian in my family. Oh, I got this little hair right here because I got Indian in my family. You know, if I let my hair grow, it's this little cowlick somewhere around here. They're like, oh, that's because you got Indian in your family. Black people have had this thing where we've been taught that our history, it only starts with slavery, that we've tried to run away from actually learning our real history and to have tried to adopt someone else's history. Ahead. And let me tell you something curious. I guarantee that if I got all the information that you think you know, your name, your parents' name, their parents' name, where they lived, where they work, all this kind of stuff. I bet you, I will find your ancestry is probably not. If you are, if now, your ancestry is not fucking Indian. It's not majority indigenous. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. I bet you I'll find where some of your family members file. And see, this is what kills me. They'll say, oh, you're going to trust that white man's documentation. But it's your ancestors who file paperwork with the Freedmen's Bureau. It's your ancestors who were counted in census as being black or African. Now, if you depending upon what census you're looking at, like if you're looking at an 1850 census, if your family was if your family member was a mixture of black and white or black and native, then you're listed as mulatto. And like the one of my ancestors that I found out that was part of the Cherokee, they were listed as mulatto. And the more I dug into it, I found out that the mulatto part comes from being with a native person who was indigenous. Now, on my father's side, the one who was listed as mulatto, I found out that they were white. It was a white Scottish dude. They were white. And then you can try to challenge census data all you want to. And it's amazed me that people think that there's such a scam, like, oh, we're going to have this census information. Do you realize that the census data from 1850, this was utilized to be able to tax? Because then after that, you can look at the tax documentation. And the census data was used to tax whoever was the farm owner, slave owner, because so you think that these slave owners purposely going to put people down there and list them as black so that they can pay more money in taxes? Or you really believe that people was that the average person in America was that caught up in the conspiracy because we don't want them to know that they from Africa? If anything, they would want you to know you from Africa. We want them, we don't want them to know they from America. Come on, man. And this the thing. Thank you, the truth. Our grandparents didn't know shit. They didn't know about that kind of stuff. They knew some stories. My grandparents helped me to identify, certain people. So like I knew to look up on, and then some of the information is just all messed up. I have my grandmother's dad, everybody called him Oni, Onie. But when I did the research and I kind of pissed off some of my family members, his name wasn't fucking Oni. His name was Arnie. His name was Arnie. My father's last name changed from Reid to Reed to Read because census people just write in whatever the hell they want to write in if they didn't want to spell that, or it just didn't look when it was written. They couldn't. You couldn't. If you look at the writing, it's hard to tell if it's an I or E. But yes, our parents were wrong about a whole bunch of shit. One part of your calculation that's off is the fact that you're saying that they was on there for 80 days. You have to take that 80 days off there. It was more like 60 days. I mean, yeah, it was less than 80 days. It was between 30 and 45 days. It did not take, 80 days to cross the Atlantic. Now, so like I was explaining to Angelina today how my grandmother's family, I can track back to a Shackelford to the Shacklefords, who all actually got their worked and got 40 acres, and it's all combined together. And right now in Carrollton, Georgia, you can go there and it's like 160 acres of land that my family has in Carrollton, Georgia. And that's all owned by one person now, but it used to be split up amongst the brothers. But you can track it back to where they all purchased and got 40 acres right after, about 7 years after slavery had ended. These were all black men. These was all slaves from African descent. If you're riding the Atlantic River, you can cross that fast, which is the primary route once you leave the west coast of Africa. Now, so anyway, let me get back on topic. So we going off topic now. I'm not done yet. So anyway, the idea that we were already here is just basically black people who are embarrassed about having African ancestry. We see how the propaganda was done about Africa. When I was growing up, they only taught us negative things about Africa. So no one I grew up with wanted to be African. We didn't want to associate with Africa. We even made derogatory comments one to another concerning Africa. Like we would make, I'm pretty sure you guys remember the term, "You African booty scratcher." We used to say shit like that to one another. That was a put down, an insult. So that was one of those things that made people, I mean, that's just one of those slight things that you can look at, that how we had a mentality towards Africa for the most part. But as you grow older, you should get wiser. Most people don't, but you should. And you come to realize that most of that stuff was propaganda. And that when you really go deeper into the history of Africa, it had, just like every nation on the planet has a proud history, just like every nation on the planet has a jacked up history. And fact of the matter is, yes, although I have some Creek blood in my veins, the overwhelming majority of the blood in my veins is African blood. At the same time, I can say I have Scottish blood in my veins, but the overwhelming majority. And you see how this works? As a matter of fact, this is a perfect example of how this works. You say that I got Creek blood running in my veins, but I'd rather be African. That's cool. But what would you say if I claim to be Scottish American? Because I have more recent Scottish blood in my family than I have Creek blood in my family. So you see how that don't work? You see how it's based on these levels of racism, and you want to make it fit whatever narrative you want it to fit in. Now, if you're a person who got a lot of that in your blood and you want to claim it, that's fine. Hell, my wife's family. I think it's her great grandfather was full blooded. I forgot what tribe it was though, but he's full blooded. So she got more of that. But I'm claiming what's the majority in my blood, and that is African. And I have yet to see some valid information that will go otherwise, as far as what the majority of people who look like me in this country, in the Americas period, would be able to claim. Right. So now on to the last part. America is Israel, or is Egypt. Y'all do know that it is a complete hoax that they found Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon. It is a complete hoax that there is a Sphinx in the Grand Canyon. It's a rock formation, and you can tell by the different layers that it is a naturally forming rock formation. It is stupidity that says that the Mississippi River is the Nile River. We know that the Indian mounds that were built in like where modern day Memphis and along the Mississippi River, that they were built no earlier than the 900s. I mean, no later than the 900s, but no earlier than the 600s CE. The pyramids in Giza have been there a hell of a long time, longer than even what they give it. They've been there prior to the last ice age. So no. We always encourage discord. You know, it's fine. I like people I don't want everybody to be on the same page. That gets boring. Don't you love how some people can't tell the difference between a social commentary and a legal commentary? Of course, they ain't putting Scottish American on there because white people run America. That's just dumb. Some people are just dumb. Some people like being contrary just for the sake of it. So, fact of the matter is, the whole idea that Egypt is America is stupid. It's just idiocy. You're talking about a country that has a long history, a country that has documented history of calling themselves Kemet, the Kush Empire, all the other Sudanese empires. You have a long history of that. So to even contemplate that, all it does is it gravitates to people who feel oppressed, and through that, they find some little thread that they can pull on to make themselves feel better instead of just recognizing the world history is the world history. They want to put the Bible in America. They want to make themselves feel like America is so important and that America is the Holy Land, instead of just letting Egypt be Egypt, Israel be Israel, Jordan be Jordan, you know, all of that just be what it is. This is a very sad statement of a person's mind who tries to force Egypt to be America to be Egypt. And even have some who go for, oh, the gopher wood is in Florida. It's only wood that's found in Florida, and the Bible says that Noah built his ark out of gopher wood. Shit wasn't called gopher wood until the 19th century, until the 1950s, when a dude who looked at some Turay wood and called it gopher wood. It's also called stink wood. But biblically, nobody knows what gopher wood actually is, and it doesn't even, they can't even tell if they're saying gopher was like a nation or a place, and that's the wood that was there, or if it was a specific type of wood that everybody in the Canaanite region knew to be gopher wood. So it was 1950 when somebody named that gopher wood, and these people idiotically tried to jump on that and say that that's what Noah built his ark, and it only grows here. It's one of the dumbest. When I catch people saying that, it makes me realize how desperate of a person I'm talking to, who desires for America to be greater than it is. You know. Here's the deal, dude. We can have conversation, but if you get in the name calling, either one or two things gonna happen. Either one, I'm gonna be nice and just block you, or two, I'm gonna cuss your ass out. One or two. One or two. Because I can tell. I can tell that this person is not a very intelligent person. That whoever mic drop is not a person that you can actually have an intelligent conversation with. So I would tell everybody to ignore the idiocy of his comments. I've expressed the difference between legal terms and social terms, but yet the minuscule mind of his or her cannot comprehend the difference. And so they have to keep relating the same thing over and over again. Most likely they could be, and most likely is, some white supremacist or someone who believes in that, but not not white themselves. Because any person who can't understand the difference in why the average white American will only call themselves American, whereas other people relate to a culture like Korean Americans do, Chinese Americans do, Japanese Americans do. It is through the systematic aspect of racism that these identifications exist. In the first census, there were only three categories: free whites, all other free persons, and slaves in around 1850. Mulattoes was also added to all multiracial categories were included in this term. So if a person can't understand how this country has grown and what it is and how these systems are still in place, he's just not that intelligent. Okay? Just not that intelligent. It's kind of like those people. No, I ain't even gonna go there. That'll make it political. I'm not going there. I saw something, but it keep moving. If you stay in that location, you would be considered. And see, here's the thing. There may be some truth to that. But the problem is the millions of documentation of people coming from Africa, being brought over from Africa, of them being identified as African or slave or being identified as African or colored from Africa. Millions of tax dollars paid for slaves. What year was the compromise? That compromise came long before the Indian Removal Act, because the Southern plantation owners didn't the 2/5 compromise, because they didn't want to pay taxes on their African slaves at the same as counting them as a whole person, because they were deemed as property. And wait a minute, curious one, that may be true for you. Your whole family may be completely indigenous. That's possible. But for the most of us who look like this, it's not. What? Help me understand what you're saying. Some people that came from Africa were returning back to America? I've never even heard that one. I've never heard that one before in all my 52 years. Because unless you're talking about pre-Columbian, wasn't nobody coming over here post-Columbian on slave ships because they want to return back to America. Thank you for your service, Curious. Don't feel bad, Daddy. I have not read one of his comments. Not a one have I read. But no. Um, the thing that bothers me the most about it now, like I said, if curious, if that's where your family comes from, that's fine. But the majority of people don't. And the majority of black people in America don't. But there is so much self-loathing that they will grasp and hold on to anything. Either they're holding on to I'm an Israelite, holding on to we were already here, holding on to uh, Egypt is America, or they're I'm Moorish. I got family members who run around telling they're Moorish, and I'm like, yeah, do you even know what a Moor is? A Moor is an Arab, and then they grafted in some black people and they grafted in some white people, and then you're talking about the people that existed from a starting point that you can easily identify. Oh, mm-mm. Oh, you know what? I normally wouldn't read your stuff because I can't understand what you're saying, but this is another point that they try to make. Israelites are black people. No, they're not. People of color, yes. Black people in the way that we identify black people today, no. Israelites were originally Canaanite people. These Canaanite people would have had a mixture of people from northern Levant all the way up into Turkey, people down into Egypt. So would they have a mixture of color? Would they have been brown people? Yes, they would have some brown. Then they had a large incursion of Greeks. Then they had a large incursions of Romans. So Israelite people are not some pure blood people. There really isn't anything that the Sentinel Peak Island people are probably very few, one of the very few pure blood of anything. But everybody else got mixtures. And the Israelite people had a tremendous amount of mixtures because that land was conquered so many times. They got Assyrian blood, they got Babylonian blood, Persian blood, Greek blood, Roman blood. They got Indus Valley blood, they got Turkish blood. And all these people were mixing together. So then to say that, oh, they were all black, no, no, no. That's like when people like, oh, the Bible is our story. No, it's not. It is not our story. My family members didn't have shit to do with the Bible until it was forced on them when they came to the Americas. That's when the Bible was forced on them. For the ones that I'm sure I got some family members that didn't get forced over here, it got forced on them during colonization. Let's see. The thing that makes Dane Calloway um, popular is the fact that there are a lot of black people who don't want to have any African ancestry. And so it sounds good to them. My only thing about it is what you're going to do about it. I don't see Dane Calloway building a reservation. I don't see him getting Native American rights. Now, I haven't paid attention to him for about 3, 4 years now, so it's possible he could be doing it now. But in all the years that I paid attention to him, I never saw him doing anything. Well, he was not getting any land. He wasn't setting up casinos. What is the grand point if you ain't gonna take advantage of the situation? Uh, Actually, Mike Drop, if you did some research on Moors, you'll see that they started out as groups of Arabs. And then as they conquered across the North African peninsula, North Africa, and conquered into Europe, they also grafted people into being Moors and Muslims. And so you had Moors who were grafted into them, much the same way other tribes graft people into them once they conquer them. It's a popular thing to do. The Romans did it, the Greeks did it. Most of the time when a nation conquered another nation, they would graft some of those people in there. Just like I explained how the Assyrians grafted the Israelites into their tribe, into their group, their people group. So did the Babylonians and the Persians. It's something that people have done throughout history over and over again. And as far as being able to talk about this, curious, there is not one point that I have made that you can disprove. Not one. Not one point. Not one point. Because the fact of the matter is, most people of color who are black, like me, most people can only track their family back to the early 1900s. Very few have been able to go back. It's a lesser number that goes back into the 1800s. And very few, incredibly very few, can go to the 1700s. Now, my family on my father's side, I was able to track back to the 1700s. Most people can't even go that far. The trail goes dead. So people like to pick a point and stay right there. I didn't say Moors or Arabs and left it there. I explained the whole thing about how they grafted it into other people and conquered North Africa. What the hell? I think some people just, it's like that person who you can give them a whole paragraph, but all they heard is one little sentence in the paragraph. But anyway, I was looking to see if there was what y'all was saying. That is the mindset that a lot of people have anywhere in the world but in African country. I know one dude, he got like a damn a speck of Vietnamese blood in him, and that mother claimed Vietnamese. And that's cool. I don't expect anybody to agree with me 100%. Okay, this usually would be a good example, curious. It usually would be a good example, but let me broaden that example just a little bit or tighten it up a little bit. About 3-4 days ago, my wife made some coffee. It starts out as black coffee, but we don't have any. We don't have raw sugar in our house, so we don't have sugar. But we didn't have enough cream, the same amount of cream we normally would put in our coffee. So we only put a little bit. So when you drink the coffee, it tastes way more like black coffee than it did with cream. Than when we put our normal amount of cream in the coffee. The caramel macchiato. But so here's the thing. When I look at my ancestry, from what I could find, there's only about four of my ancestors who are either Caucasian or indigenous. Four out of about 60, 50, 60 people. No, it's more than that, actually. When I think about that other line and that line. So out of a good 100 plus people that I researched in my family, only about 4 of them are not black. So that coffee, it got a little drop of cream in it, just a little drop of cream. And you're right, Renee. A lot of black people are afraid to visit Africa. And you know what's stupid about that? I get black people all the time who want to do a business. And usually they want to do a business that is completely saturated in America. Or they want to do a business that's very difficult to be successful. But if they went to Africa, they would be more successful. But as soon as you mention Africa to them, they get scared. They rather go some other country and do it. And I'm like, y'all, it's just stupid. Curious, you heard me telling Mike Drop that we are not talking about law. I'm talking about social. I'm not talking about law. You smarter than that. Come on, man. I'm talking about social, not law. If I was talking about law, it'd be a whole different conversation. I don't like to sneeze. Can't stand sneezing. Conversation would be totally different if I was talking about law. Yes, Black's law book defines black totally different. Not talking about the law. I'm talking about social. And see, that's one of the ways that they trick folks. They'll talk about social, but use Black's law to define the social naming. That doesn't make any sense. It's a good little trick. And you know what? At the end of the day, unscrambled, everybody comes from Africa because the leading theory is out of Africa theory. That is the absolute leading theory. I don't know if y'all saw it about 10 years ago when that Chinese DNA scientist was trying to prove that Chinese people are indigenous to China, started in China, ain't never came from nowhere else but China, only to find out that Chinese people came from East Africa. And this, Yams, you're right. But when you really dig deep into their stories, what they're talking about is something that happened 25,000 years ago, something that happened 100,000 years ago. They're not talking about what was happening in 1600s. They're talking about the fact that, so most of the it's not colonization. Most of the people coming to the Americas prior to our recorded history uh, indicates that many came over the land bridge out of China. Others came by way of ship on the South Pacific South Pacific and just the Pacific in general. Like there's a particular tribe in Peru, and they have, I think, like 34% of the same DNA as people of Japan. It wouldn't be Pangea. Pangea was 3 billion years ago, man. I mean, 3 million years ago. Pangea is too old for. We don't have any evidence of people being in the Americas that go back far enough for Pangea. Now, if they find that there were people in the Americas 3 million years ago, Pangea will work. But as of right now, there's no evidence of that. Yeah, I couldn't help but read. Y'all gotta read that. James is saying we came over on spaceships. So I guess, James, you believe in the Anunnaki story, that the Anunnaki boarded people on their spaceships when Anu decided that he was going to separate the earth, and he took people on the spaceships and settled in the Americas and Australia and China and all that. Because that's the Anunnaki story. That what's my guy name? Zachariah Ascension was telling. Well, here's the thing, Unscrambled. When scientists say that we are related to apes, it is because we share 98% of the same genome. That's not saying we come from apes. It's just that we share that percentage. Now, if you look at our DNA compared to any DNA of any animal on the planet, you're going to find a certain amount of shared DNA. That's just how planets work. Everything that has life on this planet is going to have certain levels of shared DNA. And it's because of that that we can exist on this planet. Oh, my bad, my bad. I was quoting James wrong, y'all. My bad. He didn't say we came on slave. He said we came on slaves. My bad. My bad, James. My bad. My bad. My bad. No, Zechariah Ascension, I give him credit for his efforts of his early translations, but just like anything with archaeology or history itself, the more refined it gets, the more you know what the real story is, or well, at least what they believe they was talking about. So many of his things have been found to be mistranslations, and that's all right because that's how it should work. You believe that this is what it is, but then as other people do peer review, you get to perfect it better. Exactly. We share DNA with a banana, but that doesn't mean we evolved from bananas. We share DNA with everything. I don't know much about that. So you have to explain it, or I have to go and research it. There is some truth to that. There is some truth to that. But the beauty of it is that a lot of people jumped on Zechariah Ascension's writings because it made money. But more of the pure archaeologists, the ones who went and created algorithms for computers to be able to read cuneiform better than what humans can read it and decipher it as, those are the peer reviews that I read. I do look at who's writing it and why are they writing it and who are they writing it for. Don't you just love when they try to insult you and then they say something stupid like Christianity started in Africa? Christianity started in the Levant. Christianity started in modern day Israel. Did Christianity spread to Egypt and then in 300 spread to Ethiopia? Sure. but it sure as hell didn't start in Africa, and it sure hell didn't start in sub-Saharan Africa. They try to, and maybe see he's showing his intelligence because it's not hard to block somebody. It's really not. It's not. Peter, let me show you how easy it is to block somebody. Boom. Blocked. I'm gonna unblock him later, but these people they think that's well. I'm helping him out. He don't, he wanted to block me, so I helped him out. Now we know that he means Christianity did start in Africa. Where in Africa? That's where Asia is at. It's over in Africa. No, it's not. The people in the Levant, the Assyrians never considered themselves to be part of Africa. The Babylonians never considered, the Moabites, none of those people considered themselves to be African or of Africa, of that land, of what we call Africa. Exactly. Christian are written in African. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew. New Testament is written in Greek. And it shows hell, like I said before, it was not in what we today call Ghana, Ivory Coast, Congo, Angola, South Africa, Zimbabwe. Shit, it wasn't even in Sudan. The furthest south that Christianity got before colonization was Ethiopia. That's it. And we know this for sure, James, because when they got there, when the Christians got there, they was worshiping other gods. That's how we know. They didn't find no Christians there. They had their own religions. And I remember this, it was this time frame, I think it was like the 80s or the 90s, where people were trying to claim that the Levant or Asia Minor was Northeast Africa. And I was like, that's just stupid. Now, that would be like saying, because there was also a consensus of people who were saying that there's no such thing as Europe, that Europe is just West Asia, that they wanted Asia to go all the way across. Since there was no water that broke the continent, there was nothing that broke that continent up, that Europe is just West Asia. Yes, Rexon, it was the Axiom Empire. They converted to Christianity in 330 CE. But people like to do that. Now, there is, however, a distinction. The Sinai Peninsula separates what we call Africa, the African continent, and the, what's that place? The Levant. But more importantly than that, we look at continental divides. We look at where the continents begin and the continents end, the land underneath. Just like Mexico is not part of Central America. I grew up as a kid thinking that Mexico was part of Central America, but Mexico is part of North America. Central America starts after Mexico. And most of that is because of how those things were named by people. That people decided where North America ends and where it begins. Where Central America begins, where it ends, where South America begins, where it ends. Because if you look at all of it, there is actually nothing that separates other than continental shelves that separate the whole Western Hemisphere. if you were able to, well, so you can't drive, but if you could walk from the northern point in North America all the way to the southern point and be on land the whole damn time. Now you might get messed up in the Darien Strait, but it's okay. And this, I'm gonna actually agree with Mike Drop. Borders are man-made creations. If you really wanted to look at it, the Western Hemisphere is not divided at all. Asia and Europe, not divided at all. You could. But that's how we've determined it. And since the overwhelming majority have determined these land masses are what they are, but people try to say, make up stuff. But the thing about it is that the people of Israel, the people of Israelites who started their Israelite religion, are not the people of the sub-Saharan Africa. They're not the people of North Africa, or what we call North Africa. They're not the people of the Saudi Peninsula. They're not part of what at any time frame has been identified as Africa. Hell, Egypt didn't identify as Africa. Ethiopia didn't identify as Africa. They identified with just their nation. But, and I agree with King Luther, but in order for civilization to function the way it does, we have to draw lines. Yeah. And this is a good point. Most people try to utilize whatever their religious book is to decide what area is what. And then they try to use whatever book that they read to add parts in it that don't exist. At no point, I don't think any of the Bible writers really knew what the hell was going on west of the Sinai Peninsula. Because there's a lot of shit that they don't mention. King Luther, that is so disrespectful. Black and Miles, I only smoke real cigars, sir. Black and Miles, do you know what a Black and Mile is? A Black and Mile is D-level grade tobacco. This is tobacco they wouldn't even dare put in a cigar. This is tobacco that they cigarette companies wouldn't even use. It's the worst of the worst tobacco. And they crunch it all up and they press it and they spray all these chemicals on it. And then they spray some flavoring on it and turn it into a Black and Mild. Oh my gosh, sir. That's a valid point, Evelyn. You ain't really in the country until you cross that till you pass through customs. Black and Miles. I didn't mean to hit that. Oh, Brian. Acid blundies, they add chemicals to acid blundies, just by the way. Any flavored cigar, they add chemicals to it. Just to let you know. These are natural, no chemicals. Randall, you have missed an hour and a half. An hour and a half. But, and the reason why the Hebrew Israelites can get away with what they get away with, the reason why we were already here. People can get away with what they do, and and when I say get away with, I mean that people will believe them and people will follow them, is because human societies have made shit up since societies began. Since the first group of people decided to call themselves something, decided to carve out some territory, and all of that consistently changes over history, to be honest. Now, there are some defined things that we can know. We know how extensive the Axiom Empire was, how extensive the Assyrian Empire, the Egyptian Empire. We know the time frames of how big they were and when they shrunk, who conquered who for the most part. And that says a lot because probably about 99% of world history is unknown to us, completely unknown. Like, there's a lot of stuff about history we don't know simply because we haven't found the information concerning it. I mean, shit, people didn't even really know about people like Hatshepsut until like 50, 60 years ago, and really didn't know. And then just recently they found Thutmose the second, Thutmose the second's tomb, only more recently. So we are lacking in a lot of what happened to who and where. But the things that we do know, we can be certain of for the most part. This is why peer review is so vital and important, because, like, I forgot who said it, but there can be money involved. I think Boss Lady might have said it. No, or Evelyn. Definitely, I know a lady said it. But when the money gets in there, it does mess things up. But when these people are just claiming shit that we know has no feasibility whatsoever, there is absolutely no way that anybody in the Americas are Israelites. Impossible. People in Africa, not Israelite. Europeans are not Israelite. Asians are not Israelites. There's absolutely no way that Noah's flood happened and killed everybody on the planet and every animal on the planet and would have killed every plant on the planet. And then from 3 families who are of the same family, they repopulated the earth. And then this whole slavery thing that they are adding to the Transatlantic, adding that from Deuteronomy, when if any time fulfilled Deuteronomy, it would have been in 70 CE when Titus conquered Judea and went by land and by ship and sent a bunch of the diaspora to Egypt. Now, understand, Titus didn't just send them to Egypt. Titus sent them all over the empire, which is what the Romans did anyway. And yes, trauma, everybody would be, if everybody came from those 3 brothers and their 3 wives, that means the 3 brothers got shared DNA. That means the children would all have shared DNA. That's not enough genetic material. We would all be dumb as fuck. Like, if any of you all saw that movie Idiocracy, it shows, that's what Idiocracy shows, that there was so much inbreeding that the human species became a whole country of idiots. And that's what we will be. Did anybody watch Idiocracy? We talked about it briefly. Some of y'all said y'all was going to watch it. You probably didn't. But that's what we would all be if we came from those 3 people. We'd be fucking bricks. I know, with the mentality that a lot of people have today, it makes you do want to believe that that's probably true. That's why people are stupid. Actually, Roxanne, I did a video a couple months back about the Benin Wall. So if you go to my page and, I don't know, do a search for the Benin Wall, I did a video about that. Um, in slavery, there wasn't much inbreeding. There was breeding. So after 1806, when the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed, uh, strong black men were sent around to different farms to breed. Actually, I did a video about a guy in Brazil who did like some hella breeding. Like that's all he did. He didn't do shit else but breed. But they were by that time frame, it was kind of like don't inbreed. You know, people had started learning that cousin banging is not good. We really didn't hammer that down though. So that was like the early 1800s. It really didn't get hammered down until like the 1950s. But yes, selective breeding was a common thing to be done during once the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed. And see, I'm like boss lady. I respect I respect everybody's history and everybody's culture. I respect the the smidgen of Scottish that's in my family. I respect what the Scottish did in trying to fight against the English. I don't have any. When I went to Scotland, my emotional moments had nothing to do with the people, even though they were nice people. My emotional moments was being able to walk on to St. Andrews. And if you don't know what St. Andrews is, it's one of the most beautiful golf courses in the world. So to be on St. Andrews was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Back then, I was a Christian, and I used to call golf courses God's footprints. But everybody got good stuff in their history, and everybody got tore up stuff in their history. And I look at all of it as just history. It's just history, and hopefully we learn from it. And that's what we should do, learn from the history. It's good that the overwhelming morality of the world today is against slavery, coming from what 200 years ago, a little under 200 years, a little more than 200 years ago. Everybody thought that slavery was okay. You know, Evelyn, I thought about that. Um, I have to see about what pictures I do have. Um, I wasn't sentimental. I do have a box that I know has a lot of pictures when I was on ship with the Navy. When I was in Europe, when I lived in Europe, I didn't take a lot of pictures. So I have to see what I got. Oh, that's cool. I'm gonna have to look that up. I've seen some of those videos like of people in the 1900s, and they talk about how they were born into slavery, and they remember it, and they talk about it. Look, man, don't disparage my golf, okay? Don't disparage my golf. Actually, I first started golf and cigars came to me at the same time. I was forced to play golf by my command, and I pulled out my pipe when they pulled out their cigars, and they was like, "You can't smoke a goddamn pipe out here," and they gave me a cigar. So they happened together. It's a beautiful thing. So her great grandmother lived to be 107. She said she was a sharecropper. Yeah. Um, my my pappy was born in 1927. He told me about how he was chef. He grew up as a kid while his dad, well, he lived with his grandfather, and they sharecropped. They were sharecroppers. And my grandfather told me about the same thing, how he lived. He was with his dad, and they were sharecropping. But then his brother um, went off and got a job. My grandfather's mother died. My grandfather and his dad moved in with him, and weirdly his name was Buster. Like I thought that was a nickname, but his name was Buster. And they lived with him, and that's how my grandfather got out of farming. And my grandfather was born in like 1930. Um, Jeremy, I had a collection of pipes, but they got stolen on my last military move. I had all the Sherlock Holmes big pipes. I had the ivory pipes. No, I had some style to my stuff. I did have one corncob though. I had to get a corncob pipe. I used to love to read Mark Twain when I was a kid, so I had to get a corncob pipe. No, he can't. I'm telling y'all, I'm gonna record the first time I meet Tim, and I'm gonna crack him dead in his chest. Pow! Dead in his chest. Hmm. Now, many black people in America don't talk about the trans-Sahara slave trade because it didn't affect them. But the trans-Sahara slave trade lasted for about 1,200 years, legitimately lasted for 1,200 years. But you still had countries like Libya in the 1990s and 2000s that still was involved in straight up slavery, not even like, debt slavery or sex slavery. It was straight up just, we went down into some of these, we went and grabbed, we told some of these black folks, come up here, integrate, and everything's gonna be good. And then they get them up there and they just flip them right into slaves. That's one of the reasons why I know everybody was down with Gaddafi, but I was like, this dude is allowing slavery trade in his country and ain't doing shit about it. So I was like, nah. Oh, when I crack you in your chest, I'm gonna be playing. I'm gonna be playing when I crack you in your chest. It'll be a joke. It'll be like, ah, ha, 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 ha. It'll be a joke. Don't worry about it. Oh, Raph, thank you for becoming a member on the YouTube page. I greatly appreciate that. I've thought about it. Since I started smoking cigars, I didn't realize how much work smoking a pipe is, but it might be something that I do collect again because I like pipes. Pipes are just cool. I just think they're cool as hell. And that actually goes back to our other point earlier, how the city of and that was a city state, is Sumer. It was a Sumerian city state, and it is modern day Iraq. And I want you to think about it. According to this Bible, Abraham and his children were supposed to get all the land all the way to the Euphrates, which would take you into Iraq. Tim, I'm not even gonna post what you just said. Trust me, bro. I ain't going nowhere below the sternum. I'm staying right above the sternum. Right above the sternum. What? There is there's a ritual of pipe smoking. I know that in Ifa, many of the Orishas, I know the Orisha that was supposed to be my Orisha, cigars is one of the things that you give them. And when you're doing certain ceremonies, you blow the cigar smoke on the not just the altar, but on the what's it called? Is it the Edu on the whatever the gifts you give them? I forgot what it's called. The gifts that you give during the Orisha. And I think Oshun also cigar smoke is blown on the offering. Oh, is it Ogun? Like by Ogun? I learned most of that stuff when I was sharing a house with the young lady. Yeah, I know I said Igbo, not Igbo is the people. When I was sharing a house with a young lady who practiced Ifa, and I would watch her rituals. Every now and then I participate. Then I had my reading. I got my reading done. Priest of Eshu, according to her, the guy that's in charge of her Ile. And I'm mad because I used to have some Eshu priest robes, but they went missing. Oh, you talking about that kind of ritual? Yes. Yeah, cleaning and all that stuff is too much with a pipe. Wait a minute. There's the Igbo people, but what is the offering called? No, it's called something, man. What is an offering called in Ifa? Nope, hang on. What is an offering called in the practice of Ifa? What is it saying FIFA? Oh no, you're right. My bad. The Igbo. The Igbo is a ritual sacrifice. So I was right, but you're right, her. I was right, but thought I was wrong. Wait a minute, but the people are called Igbo people, right? But no, there it is. Yeah. My bad. You right, bro. You right, her. I was right and wrong at the same time, but you right, right. John, don't make me kick your ass next time I come to North Carolina. That accent be throwing the little phone off. Yeah. Um, Sharing that, like I knew a little bit about E5 before I met her. I learned a lot more, but I did learn enough to know that it's not for me either. Like, it's not for me. Any deity worship is just not for me. That in itself. And then the sacrificing of animals, that's not for me. I'm not sacrificing animals. But I tell you what though, her homeopathic medicine work, best physical shape of my life without with doing minimal workout. Oh, got it. Igbo is a people, Egbo. is the offering. Thank you. So I'm just saying it wrong. Ebo and Ebo. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Evelyn. I knew I was somewhere in the park. I was circling the neighborhood in a black SUV. I was there. No, I don't like to fight. And for me to say that is a truth and a lie at the same time. I don't actually like to fight, but I do like to test my skills. You know, if that make any sense to you. Well, yeah, I can't. I came to realize during that time frame, I had already deconstructed from Christianity. This was 2018. I had already deconstructed from Christianity, uh, but I still was open to see what other religions had to offer, even though I had already found most of them were left wanting. So this was an opportunity for me to firsthand learn about Ifa. She was an Ifa priestess. Their Ile was part of an Ile in Ibadan, Nigeria. So it gave me an opportunity to learn a lot being right there present. And I learned very quickly that I'm just, worshiping God is just not for me. This food chain. I hate everything comes before and everything comes after that love fight. Yeah, I know I can protect myself, but I haven't been in a real good fight, like a real good fight. I've done a lot of sparring, but I haven't been in a real good fight since like the late 90s. Like just a real good somebody's mad fight. But I've done a lot of sparring. And, and sparring is, we taking it easy. Oh, some East Africans have no idea what jollof rice is. I don't. Is jollof rice popular in East Africa? I thought that was a West African dish. I've only known West Africans to eat jollof rice. I've never, all the East Africans I know, I've never heard them talk about jollof. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, but I am gonna, me and Tim gonna spar. That's for damn sure. They always messing with me. Say I want to let the demons out in the good old fashioned. It's really just to make sure I can still do what I think I can do. It's kind of like in my mind, I can still run them. I can still run the 100-meter hurdles and them and that 300-meter hurdle in my mind. I can run it. In my mind, I can still run a 400 meters under a minute. In my mind. In my mind, I can still sprint. I can still play football, basketball, baseball. In my mind, but I know better. Pull up with a hamstring. can you can you watch? I don't do no wrestling. Y'all talking about food. What you say about jollof rice? Ah, way to go, way to go. Yeah, it is different. So the Kabbalah is So when I studied the Kabbalah, this was, now mind you, this was 2003, 2004, sometime around there when I first started researching the Kabbalah. And, you know, if memory serves me, it's Jewish mysticism. So it's like an esoteric version of Judaism, where you basically, they are taking hermetics and mixing it with magic, with what they would call magic. And, you know, I just found it to be kind of a trying to understand the universe, but by implementing in concepts that they were familiar with in their culture, like Lilith and all that. But they did have certain things in it, like some sacred geometry and things of that nature. So I found that aspect of it interesting because it's mathematical, and it also kind of lines up with some of the hermetic laws. So I thought it was interesting, but it's kind of, but for me, it's just an extension of Judaism. You still have to have the whole Yahweh stuff to go with it, if I'm remembering it correctly. Really? You find Buddhism expensive? How is it expensive? Because I've never been charged anytime I go to a Buddhist temple. Anytime I went to a Buddhist temple and just go there to meditate. Now, this one lady used to make me work. No, that wasn't a Buddhist temple. That was a Hindu temple where she used to make me work all the time. She always had me carrying stuff for her. But I don't think I ever had to pay for anything. One of the hardest thing about Judaism that I find actually is you got Judaism, then you got Kabbalah, then you got all the midrashes, and you got all this extra stuff. It's kind of remind me of Buddhism, of how you got Siddhartha, who is the original Buddha, and then you got like all these other Buddhas who wrote additional stuff that changes the concepts of it based on the time frame that they were writing it. So the Judaism is just, it's like everything else, is history keeps changing it, keeps changing it. If there was a way of understanding a God in all of this stuff, it should be consistent throughout all of its eternity. Oh, you're saying they sell too many books? Okay. See, you can't come to me with a New Testament every goddamn on few years. Now, that is one reason why I like the Tao. The Tao is its 80 sayings, and that's it. There's no addition, there's nothing else, it's just that. And there's no God to worship, none of those, there's no heaven, hell, getting into kind of bullshit. It just is what it is. I know she's talking to King Luther, but I'm with you. The only thing I won't do is sweep. I can lift furniture. I could go run. I can lift weights. I can hit the heavy bag. My back might get a little tight, but as soon as I damn pick a broom up and start sweeping, damn back go out. It's a weird thing, and it don't happen every time, but it don't happen enough time while sweeping that I don't sweep if I can help it. Actually, my wife pick on me because when I do sweep, that's all. That's it. Like the ashes that's been falling is just gonna be. That's it. None of that. None of that. But yeah, and so you got the Zohar. You know, it's too much. If this God of Israel is the God of the universe, why is there all these extra bullshit? Why you gotta have different writings for different people at different times? All of it should just be clear across the board the same. You know, If this God said that slavery was okay, then it still should be okay. If stoning your daughter because she turned out not to be a virgin on a wedding night was okay back then, you should be doing it now. All this extra stuff that they changed because society changes. And I don't shovel snow because I would never live somewhere where I got to. Mm-mm. But that's one of the things about religion that is so jacked up, is that um, you can't pin it down. You can't pin it down. This is my cigar, not a blunt. You say I don't belong to him unless he reveals himself, and I'm convinced. Yeah, that dude got to come down and he got to do some. The God ain't got to just come down like, ooh, walked into the room. I need some convincing. You need to show me something that's gonna convince me. And if you're supposed to be the God, then you should know what I need to be convinced. Ooh. That's why y'all live in Philly and I live in South Texas. Because we had a little ice storm about a month ago and I was pissed. And we ready to move. Because it's bullshit. Mm-mm. But all of this, like Mind Talk is saying to Jose, Yahweh is just a conflated L. And so it's just more and more deity worship. But yes, like Evan said, God is supposed to be for all times. We should say like Gandhi, who, oh, let me put it up so y'all can see it. Like Gandhi, whose people make excuses for his racism. Right. I'm all for people changing. People can change. If you're supposed to be the supreme God of the universe, you ain't supposed to change. Now, I'm still gonna hold Gandhi down for the bullshit that he did, but he will change. Can I make emojis? I didn't know I can do that. You know, I ain't been an IT guy since 2003. So you can make emojis. That's new to me. Right. And this guy didn't give, oh shit. Hey, this guy didn't give two rats' asses about what was happening to Africans. Go beyond that. When the Romans were conquering, they treated the Brits like shit, like trash. He didn't care about the Brits. Said they were only good for slavery and Coliseum games. Treated them like trash. Didn't have a word to say when that was going on. Didn't have a word to say when the Inquisition was going on. Didn't have a word to say when Cortez was over here massacring people. Ain't had shit to say. He can keep that. Mm. But, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call it a day. Plus, I want to get back on this project that I was working on because it's working on organizing my comic book so I can make a comic book wall for a new channel that I started, that I'm starting, where I'm gonna talk about the MCU and comic books. I gotta do more than just talk about this. I'll get bored out of my mind if I talk about this all the time. So that's why I've started other channels as well. So, uh, so if shameless plugs, it's shameless plug time. Shameless plug time. If you want to hear my views about relationships, then follow the channel Lorenzo Reed 369 on YouTube. If you want to talk about basketball, the NBA in particular, follow my channel, Stogies and Hoops, on YouTube. If you want to talk about the MCU and comic books, then I haven't made a video yet, but I just started a new channel called Cowboy Cool Comics. Cowboy Cool Comics. And as of you know, I did start a channel called Voiceovers by Renz, and I only put one video on there so far, but I'm gonna be reading shit. So if you want shameless plug, that was my shameless plug. But yes, I'm glad. Thank you. A couple people said they like that channel. Wrath and Nick Nati. But yeah, if you didn't know, I got a couple thousand comic books that I collected over from the late 80s to the 80s to the 90s to the late 90s. I gotta be boss lady. Otherwise I get bored. I would get bored. I don't know. How would I do that? Let's see. Let me be real shameless. I don't even know what the links are to those channels. That's a dang shame. But I bet y'all can find out. Let's see. How would I find the link? Ha ha ha. Oh, so that's how it goes. All right. I'm just shamelessly plugging. Shamelessly plugging. Shameless plugs. What was that called? Do you consider a trip to Kemet with as soon as I can get a passport? Yeah, the first editions are. I have a lot of first. I have a few. Anything that was. I have a few first editions, but I was going through some of my collection today, and I was surprised at some of the books that I have that are $200 books, $500 books, $1,000 books. Yes, the Olmecs more than likely were black people, but they were not my ancestors as far as my direct ancestors. I believe that the Olmecs came here probably most likely during one of the crossings, either by ship or they came by land. Okay, I've shamelessly plugged all my channels. You know, that's a valid question, but nobody knows what happened to them. They were gone before any Europeans came over here. So what happened to them? And the leading theory is out of East Africa, But there's also West Africans who came over here before Columbus, so they could be a part of that. But they are not my direct ancestry because we don't know where they literally came from. So until we know where they literally came from, we can't necessarily say who they are, who they were. There's very little information on them, and I would love for there to be more time spent on finding out who the Olmecs were. That would be a great achievement, a great finding. I don't know if you're new here, but I don't take a little bit and jump way the hell over here. I need more information. And this is a great final comment because I'm getting the hell off here. Getting the hell off here. Black people from the U.S., don't forget, we're not Egyptians, we're not Hebrew Israelites, or Aztecs or Olmecs, or Chinese or Sumerians or Nubians. Most of us are West Africans. Our ancestry goes to West Africa. Now, what happened before that? We don't know. We know that it's most likely that Southern and West Africans migrated up into North Africa, then migrated into the Levant area, then some went over into Europe, others went into China. Well, we do know that they went into, after leaving East Africa, they went into China and Japan and all that. We know that some sailed on ships and went into India, and we know some went from the India and the islands, Southwest Asia islands, and went into Australia. And we do know that some people came from the South Pacific and into the Americas. The Olmecs could very well be, have you ever see ancient Japanese people? They could very well be ancient Japanese people who came to Mexico and set up there, and for some reason they all disappeared. We just don't know. We just don't know. So because I follow that mindset, the whole planet eventually evolved, not evolved, I don't want to say evolved, but adapted out of Africa. Whole damn planet. Which, like somebody said earlier, if you fly into a low orbit above the Earth, there are no borders, none whatsoever. And if you can get your mind to a higher plane of thought, you would recognize that we're all family. We're all of the same, we're all family. And like most families, we have problems with each other. But unlike most families, we innately want to fix those problems. And we should try to fix those problems. And we should stop dividing ourselves based on pigmentation and possible origins. Because we all originate from Earth. There's that part. So y'all have a great night. And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations. And I'm out.